What's up, dads, men? It's your boy G, bringing you a very special episode of the Fit Fat Dad podcast. Today, we are going to bring on the show a retired U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beret, good friend of mine, Joe Bisciglia, and he is going to talk about the difference between mental toughness and mental resiliency. It is a great episode. Tune in. Let's do it. What's up, dads? So you've heard me talk recently about my trial using this mental performance shot, Magic Mind. So I've done about a month now, and I'm really loving this. The need to consume as much caffeine as I've consumed on the daily basis, not really there anymore. So I would say I cut my caffeine consumption in half. I'm able to get going. Take this first thing in the morning. It gives me the boost and the mental clarity that I need. So if you're interested, I highly recommend you give it a try. Magic Mind. Take me a shot right here. It's great. Tastes great. Makes you feel good. Right now, if you want some, we're running a special 20% off. Go to magicmind.com/fitfatdad20. That's magicmind.com/fitfatdad20.
Okay, Joe, well, we're going to hop into it, man. And really what I want to do is just kind of talk to, like, Special Forces, Green Beret. You guys are my hero, the true, like, alpha men of the world, man. And I know you're the humble servant over here, and you're not going to, like, take any credit for that. But
I feel like you're talking about some of the guys I knew over the last couple years.
Well,
yes, okay. I'm big fans of theirs, too.
Yeah, you're funny, dude. So I want to talk a little bit about that because that is such an interesting journey. So talk to me a little bit about your decision to go, one, into the military, but then take it to another level. Like, what made you want to be a Green Beret?
Yeah, so, I didn't have a big dramatic entry into the Army. I guess talking to my folks, they've told me that as a kid, I mentioned wanting to be in the Army one day, maybe before I started formulating all those memories. But as I grew up, it just really wasn't part of the everyday conversations amongst teenagers. Particularly, I think being in Minnesota, we were pretty far north, no military installations close by, so it just wasn't part of my thought process. I had this understanding that after high school, I was going to college. That was the formula for success. I got to college in 2001, fall of 2001, and then, of course, 9/11 happened. Mm-hmm. And even through that, it felt distant in a way. But then the stories started coming out about soldiers deploying to Afghanistan and then to Iraq, so on and so forth. And for me, I started reading these stories about young guys and gals that were overseas on these deployments that they had signed up for the college money. This wasn't for them. This wasn't part of their plan. Meanwhile, frankly, I was in college and the shoe wasn't fitting. Right. I was there. I was going to most of my classes.
Most of your classes.
But there was something missing in my life. And then around the same time, I watched the movie Black Hawk Down. As corny as it sounds, I feel silly every time I recount it, but I saw this movie and I saw these guys that weren't in the Army that I understood the Army to be, in these roles that were very independent, and I was like, man, how do I do that?
Yeah.
That looks cool. I could get into that. And meanwhile, I'm seeing these stories about cats overseas, and I thought, here I am. I could picture myself doing something along those lines. And these guys and gals are downrange, not wanting to be there. They want to be where I'm at. Like, what is going on here? So I said, I think I'm going to consider this. So I went into a recruiting station, really just with a movie script. And like, hey, man, I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. How do I go do that? How do I go be the guy, my finger is my safety guy? That guy seemed cool, yeah. Right? So I go in, and the guy said, well, you can't sign up to be him. That takes some experience and some tryouts and some things. So, okay, well, what could I do? And just so happens, right people come along in your life. And this recruiter had spent time in aircraft with 10th Special Forces Group. And he said, would you be interested in this, Special Forces? And I had no idea what he was talking about. Growing up in Minnesota, I had no idea that this organization was a thing. So he shows me some more pictures. We talk about what small teams do, independent teams. And I see the picture of the horse soldiers. That was right around the time that comes out. And I was like, man, that seems cool. Sign me up for that. I'll go do that. I was pretty excited. So that was my journey from, hey, I think I'm going to go talk to this recruiter, to, man, next thing I know, I'm like, where's the paper? Let me sign. I'm ready to go. Let's do this thing. So.
Yeah. So the horse soldiers, you mean like the 12 strong, like the Chris Hemsworth movie?
Yes, right.
Yeah,
So there's
yeah.
there's one famous picture that I recall, and then, man, I thought those guys were incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, that exact story. I'm not sure how historically accurate that is. I don't
Hollywood
know.
movie
I
is.
wasn't there, but great.
The synopsis was right. They were some of the first to ride in, like boots on the ground, right?
Yeah.
And they did it on horseback, and
I think one of the incredible things was that those images started coming out, and we've had from day one coverage in those theaters in ways that are unique.
yeah,
So for me, as a guy with no exposure to special forces, to be able to see those images was a pretty powerful thing, and definitely shifted my mindset away from, oh, okay, so there's only the green little soldier guys that I played with as a kid, and the Army's all, big formations, and not to ding on those at all, but that wasn't what attracted me. These images really attracted me.
So did you have, was your family prior military? Was there any prior generational service there that kind of made you think that? Or was this just a natural desire, like, man, I want to do more? Like I'm leaving the cards on the table, per se.
Yeah, I think so. We did have some military service in my family. We weren't we don't, some folks, it's generation after generation after generation, that you'll hear folks say that the military is, or the Army is, a family business in some ways for a lot of folks. For us, that wasn't the case. I had some folks in my family that did serve in the Navy or in the Army, but I think it being kind of sporadic that way was part of the reason why it wasn't so ingrained in me to think of that as, man, that could be a good fit for me.
Yeah.
But what I did realize was, man, academia wasn't doing it for me. There was an itch I needed to scratch. I think for me, the idea of it, the adventure of it, the physical. I was always an athlete growing up, so there I was in college. I was not playing sports. I was, here and there going to the gym or getting in a pickup game or something like that. But I think that probably had a big part of it too. Was I just had this need for an outlet, and when that presented itself, I was drawn.
Yeah, that's great. So you get in. Let's move along a little bit. So you get in. Did you initially go that path, or did you have some training up front that you had to prepare yourself to because you don't just get in and you become a Green Beret. Like there's a whole process to that. So talk about before you get to that assessment selection process, but what you get in and now it's a waiting game or basic? What does that look like?
Yeah, so for me, I was an 18 X-ray, straight off the street into the training pipeline, so to speak. But you start off just the same way any infantryman does. You go to one station unit training. So you got your basic training, you got your infantry training there. And when I arrived there, that was the first oh my gosh, what have I done? What did I sign up for?
Right.
I mean, I'm pretty sure all the other guys on the bus and in the barracks on day one are probably thinking the same thing. We're borderline terrified of the life choice we had made.
Right.
But quickly the camaraderie starts to develop and the humor starts. I think the humor is, I remember my first night in the barracks, just wall to wall guys. And we're all trying to sleep, but nobody can sleep, I'm sure of it. And we're all just sitting there staring at the ceiling. And in the dead silence. Can I tell a fart joke on
Yeah,
here?
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
We
would have it no other way.
Thank you. So, in the dead silence, someone just lets one rip, and then from the other side of the room, a guy just yells, "What?" And everyone kind of chuckles, and then somebody on the other side of the room lets one rip, and the same guy screams, "What?" Like we're having this conversation,
yeah.
and everyone's like just dying laughing shortly after that.
Yeah.
And it continued for a few minutes, and I mean the tension level goes from here, the fear and terror of like, what did I do? This is so different than a college campus and an apartment, and it all kind of comes down to here.
Normalizes.
It does, and then from that point on, you're in it with your with your teammates, with your battle buddy, as we call them in basic training, and from there you're just off to the races. And it's not to say that it's not stressful and frankly scary at times, because you're pushed out of your comfort zone constantly, but you're not alone in it. And that was a big part of realizing, I think, even from that first night, and the humor and the guys, breaking the ice,
Breaking something.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it was
Ripping gas. Yeah.
right. So we get there. So we get into basic training, and I was very unfamiliar with the military in general. Mm-hmm. Some guys had grown up in military families. I felt like a complete fish out of the water. But from day one, we were accumulating skills and accumulating experience that, man, I look back on the guy that entered basic training, and then I think about being on a team and what it takes to keep up on a deployment. And it's kind of mind-blowing what they were able to take from day one and help mold me and let me grow into the guy that was ready to go downrange and go work with 11 other guys in a foreign country. And that process there, it's very gradual. It's not like I woke up one day and was all of a sudden ready. But from day one, you just start growing and pushing yourself to limits that you didn't think you were capable of.
Yeah, no, that's all. That's because it's a high stakes game, right? Like it's
Sure, yeah.
We're talking if you aren't doing your job, could mean somebody's life or the mission is at risk. Whereas sports, right? My background is football. It's like, I mean, you could put the game at risk. You could get a penalty, you get a flag, but at the end of the day, that's in the scheme of things, that's nothing compared to like that.
Yeah.
So the transformation of, you mentioned how they were able to take this just lump of clay with very little shape or form, and then gradually mold it into this just like machine that's like full of discipline and just toughness. And
well, I
you didn't go that
machine. I didn't go that far. But I think looking back, I think yes, the stakes are higher when you're preparing for and in the mindset of combat operations. But really the stressors that you feel at the individual level, like, man, my need to perform and do my job well, my need to support and do my part on this team, it's very, very akin to athletics. And I think that for me, the camaraderie was something that I had felt on sports teams and I needed.
Yeah.
And really, you may or may not know this about me, but I am, on the introvert-extrovert scale, I am very introverted.
Right.
But I know that being surrounded by guys that are also developing, growing, pushing themselves is such a positive influence on me that if I let that introverted part just rule the day and I go into isolation mode, I stop growing. I get stagnant quick. And I think when I was in that academia setting, didn't feel the connection with my classmates. It just wasn't there for me. But when I got into the military and I started feeling and seeing that camaraderie and that growth, that was night and day for me.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that you knew that internally you needed to be pushed in a different direction or you just need people to pull that out of you. Like the potential's there, but
Yeah.
your nature is to gravitate towards just kind of, I'll figure it out on my own. But
My comfort zone.
Yeah, comfort
right?
zone.
Yeah. And I think now as I've grown and learned about myself over the years, I can take a little more proactive role in that, like, of pushing myself out of that comfort zone. But initially, when I was younger, I don't think I could have articulated that quite as well, but I was still attracted to the camaraderie, and I was attracted to the competition, and I was attracted to pushing ourselves to do something that we couldn't do yesterday. So
yeah, that's great. So I want to we're out of your initial training, and then let's move into trying out for. Well, that's my elementary terms of saying trying out for special forces,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
But you can do the research on it. I mean, you can do a quick Google search on it. The fail rate of assessment selection. What would you put it at? I mean, 90%, 80%. I mean, it's on average. It's not a lot of guys that are making the cut.
it sort of depends on how you look at that, and I don't know the numbers on it, but for me, from my experience, just as a guy going through it, we started with kind of an entourage at basic training, and a lot of the guys I was in basic training from day one in the Army with were on either an 18 X-ray contract or an option 40, which is a pathway to Ranger Regiment, or at least trying out for Ranger Regiment. And so a lot of those guys, what was the pass rate from day one all the way through basic and airborne, and then through SFAS and through the Q course? I couldn't begin to guess what those numbers look like. There's keepers of the numbers, I'm sure somebody knows, but the washout rate or attrition rate, however you want to phrase it, is certainly high. And a lot of those guys, a surprising number of those guys, were those that sort of self-selected. I'm done here. I'm out. This isn't what I want anymore, or today was too hard. I don't think I can do tomorrow. Whatever it might have been for them, but they walked away. So, yeah, the attrition rate, though, overall is probably high. That's fair.
So for you, what was it that drove you? I think you said early on that you just had the mindset that you weren't going to quit, right? So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I'll say from day one, I felt a little duped at first. I got to basic training, and we had some pretty, as you would expect, basic skills, tests, and things that we needed to do. And I watched myself struggle with these basic Army functions, and I watched my colleagues struggle with these, and I thought, there's no way that this just mushy, doughy thing could get formed into a special forces soldier. I couldn't imagine it. And I remember sitting with a buddy of mine. I can remember this night. We were sitting on guard duty, and I said, "Hey, man, I don't think we're going to make it. Do you think we're going to make it? I think they're going to kick us out. I think we're probably going to get kicked out, and we're going to go to another unit, and I'm going to come back, like, in better shape, and I'll know more about the Army and tactics and things." He kind of agreed with that assessment, and but I thought to myself, and I'm going to get as much out of this experience as I can. That was my mindset. I'm going to stay as long as they'll let me stay, and when they fire me, I'll have the most experience so that when I come back, I kind of know what I'm doing. And as I got time with the cadre and the instructors, and I mean, just absolutely thought the world of these guys, real life war heroes in front of me. And I was just floored by these guys, not to mention intimidated, right? And my mindset slowly started to change I think these guys were in my shoes not too long ago. Maybe it was 5 years, maybe it was 10 years, but they did this too. And if they could do it, and really what we have is I'm starting today. They had a 10-year lead on me, and I could be that guy someday. I started to envision myself in that role, and I think that really did a lot for me, converting my mindset from I'm going to get found out and fired to I'm going to give it all I got, and I may be what they're looking for. I may be the next instructor blank. But I don't know because I'm new here. So I'll throw it all out there and maybe they'll like it and they'll want me to stay. Maybe they'll tell me to go get some more experience, but I will trust in their process and I'll trust in their judgment to make that call. I'm just going to give it all I got. And then that became my kind of way of approaching each new phase of training.
That was your mantra.
That was my mantra is I'm going to make you fire me, one, and two, I'm going to give it all I got and get the most out of it as I can.
How many guys in your class kind of fit the Johnny Bravo, like the Green Beret that Hollywood portrays, like the Jack Reacher type, like the big,
right,
stoic, massive, hulking individual that you're like, this guy's in for sure, but ended up ringing the bell? Were there a lot of those guys that just physically on paper you're like, this guy's, he shouldn't even show up because he's in? Like,
right.
Were there a lot of those guys?
There was a fair number. I mean, there was a fair number that made it through. Big fellas. The kinds that told me they never failed a deadlift. They just pick the thing up and stand up. I was telling you that story about one of my old teammates.
I don't get it. You just pick it up.
He was baffled that I would have missed on a deadlift. He said, "You just grab the thing and stand up." We teased him for that for a long time. But so we had those guys that made it through, but we also had those guys that just when it came to a lot of the, I think the social and the mental challenges that come with working in a very undetermined environment, dealing with a lot of unknowns, not knowing what you're going to do in the next day of training, not knowing like a full schedule, like maybe people from off the street would be accustomed to, knowing what they've got coming up in the next week. That threw off a lot of people. That threw me off, especially initially. And some guys just couldn't deal with that. Other guys, they were, it's great to be, single digit body fat content and such, but man, if you got to go out in the woods for a week and a half and you're not eating a whole lot, and I mean, that mood tanks and that energy tanks quickly. So we did have guys that, man, this guy's a monster and he's not keeping up. What's going on? He could probably outrun anybody if it was in a gymnasium setting, but man, you put him out in the woods and it's a different ball game.
So what is it that takes those guys out of their comfort zone of a controlled scenario of being able to do all those things? But what do you think in it that just ultimately separates, like, I don't know, sets them on their uncomfortability level? Like, is it they've just never experienced going without sleep, without eating, or actually having to be pushed to those levels and they just can't deal with it? Like, what do you think is that separating factor? Like, because that is a space that your average human being is not going to push themselves to unless they're forced to do it. So until you get there, and I've never been there, but I'm very curious, knowing that you've been in that space, like, what is it now that you're gearing up to? Because in my opinion, it's real easy to be like, yeah, I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
Now you're in this space of where it's like, okay, this is real tough.
Yeah.
How do you overcome those mental demons that want to get in your head and say, no, just ring the bell, dude?
I mean, I think there's a mental toughness aspect that you can exercise that muscle in a very controlled environment, and it can be an exercise of, I've got a plan. Go to the gym. It's a grueling workout. I'm gonna knock this workout out of the park, and I'm gonna crush it. Then I'm gonna go through my recovery phase, and I'm gonna come back 2 days. I'm gonna hit it hard again. And you can be very mentally prepared for that. That takes a lot of mental toughness, right? To be able to drive through those challenging events that you've scheduled out for yourself, or your trainers scheduled out for you, or your teams put on the docket for that schedule. But then there's a resilience factor that I think is related but slightly different. And I think when you have that plan and then you start getting curveballs, you start getting the unexpected things pop up, and in a sports environment, that might be injury, that might be a changed schedule, that might be you got removed from the starting roster and now you're coming off the bench. What do you do with that challenge and that setback? I think being able to go into the unknown and just say, look, all I can do is my very best. All I can do is put it all out there, and I can roll with the punches. That requires a mental resilience that I think is very hard to train and very hard to prepare for. But in certain environments, we get opportunities to push ourselves in that realm, and certainly in special forces training, that's a component of it. Is how can you handle those unknowns or those unexpected curveballs?
Yeah, so I like how you just broke those into two spaces: mental toughness and mental resilience. And I know we spoke earlier, so it's not like I'm reading your mind, but my understanding of what you were telling me about mental toughness and the way I understood that to be, it's mental toughness is we can map out a plan and we can follow a routine. And it's probably not going to be easy, but it may be I'm setting a time to get up at 5 a.m. to go work out. And then I may have a diet and then I will be disciplined, but it's all laid out and I'm following a plan.
Right.
The resilience piece is like, well, now stuff's hit the fan that I didn't necessarily plan for. How am I going to overcome these challenges? Am I saying that right a little bit? Well,
yeah, absolutely.
Take us. This is intriguing. I think this is really, really good stuff.
Yeah. And I guess I've started to make the distinction because I've observed it in myself, and I've found it helpful to distinguish those two things. Because, right, like the alarm goes off, it's whatever it is. If you're a 4 a.m. guy, great, 5 a.m, 6 a.m, whatever it is, you might be tempted to reach, like we snooze buttons anymore this, but yeah, exactly. But you're tempted to snooze and say, not today. I know I was supposed to go for a run, but not today. That's a test of our mental toughness. We had a plan. We knew what was coming. Now, how much can we execute that plan in the face of just not wanting to, in the face of challenge and maybe even physical or mental pain that it requires to complete that task? Resilience is a little bit more like, to me, I can make a by comparison, would be, I've woken up, I'm ready to go out for that run, and the dog's freaking out, and I got to go deal with this situation over here. Now my plan is just all busted up, and what do I do? And do I let the wheels fall off and abandon my goals for that particular task, or do I figure out a way to get both done, right? And I think in the face of the training that we went through and the environments we were put in, we had both tested. Sometimes you knew what the challenge was in front of you, and did you frankly have the grit and the fortitude to get through it? And other times we were faced with a completely different type of challenge that was, you don't know what's coming tomorrow, or you don't know how long this task is going to last, but we want to see that you give it your all, and that you have the ability to grind it out even with the unknown. And that really, I think, tests your mental resilience in a lot of ways.
So you mentioned it's hard to train. You hear, I don't want to call them horror stories, but when you're in it, it can probably seem like a horror. But like you hear about some of the training, and let's just say you put in a full day of training, and you're out in the field, maybe doing physical things, you may be doing mentally taxing things, and there's this promise of rest. And you go and you're like,
so
that's motivating you all day long.
So excited. We'll
You're
get
like,
back to our
yes,
bunks. We'll be okay.
It'll
all be all right.
It'll be, that's my happy space. And then everybody plays along except for the people that are doing the training. And you get back to your bunk, you get settled in, you're looking forward to a night's rest, and then it's like sirens going off. And it's like, oh, by the way, we're doing this all over again. Did you have any of that? Did you go through any of that? And that just seems like that in itself would break people, and I'm sure it did. But so I love your example of the dog, but that's like baby sauce compared to like some of these things that
well, I gotta relate it to what I'm facing today, right? Like, how do I still? Because my world's changed, right? Yeah. So, but and I think the one thing I would say with that is that there is likeness across the different kind of arenas that we all play in, right? And so I do think there's a resilience that a challenge to my mental resilience that I experience every day. Yeah. That is not the same as what I've gone through in my professional life, but requires similar capabilities on my part. In some cases, I think the stressors of managing an everyday life is just, I mean, it can be overwhelming in the same ways that the training felt overwhelming at times. But yes, we definitely had, the days where you thought you were going to, cool, we're done. It's 10 o'clock. I think they're going to wake us up at 4 or 5, and I can get some solid sleep tonight. Tonight's the night I'm going to get some solid sleep, and it all changes. Bells go off, or cadre are walking in the halls yelling at us, and it's time to go. And you're like, no, not tonight. I thought tonight was my night.
Tonight was the recovery.
But it wasn't. It wasn't. They had other things in mind, and they were testing our resiliency and training our resiliency.
So how do you keep a positive mindset in that, positive as you can be? Because I think it'd be real easy to say, no, I'm done. Like, this is it. Like, this, you get me this time, right?
Yeah.
Like, today you take me down. Today's the day that I just say no. And I feel like it'd be real easy to get woken up when you were looking forward to sleep or whatever the situation, or to be really negative about the drill. And so now you're not doing it 100%, or you're letting in your buddy because you have a negative attitude. So how did you overcome those things? Or sometimes you were just like, man, I'm bitter and I'm getting through it. Like, what's the reality there?
Anger can fuel you. That's a fair thing, for sure. But I think for me, a lot of it was just, they're throwing this at me because they think I can handle it. And kind of, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit of, I'm going to trust in the instructors and the cadre. And those guys did it, apparently. They made it, so it can be done.
It can be done.
It can be done. And I've got to just grind it out. And I can do that. If they can do that, I can do that. Or if I come up short, they can tell me. But I'm going to drive on. But yeah, I mean, I think it was common to see guys just let the frustration overcome them, and they lost sight of that decision they made early in the process. You make the decision to sign the papers in the comfort of an office, or you're thinking about it in your apartment, and you say, this is what I'm going to do. And then you get out there to the challenge of it, the thing you decided to do, and it was a reasonable decision, a smart decision, and for me, I had to look back at that guy, like Joe, in the comfort of a living room or an office, and he made that decision. I got to trust him. I got to trust him that this is where I should be and what I should be doing. So now is not the time to question. It's easy to question when you're in kind of the middle of the pain, but now is not the time to question. I'll question it when I get through this. We'll reevaluate when I can get to another comfortable spot, but not today. Not right now. I got to just drive through.
So was it more of like just the trust and the faith in what your cadre was like telling you? Like, if you commit to these things right here, you're going to be okay, and your mind's probably going to want to go over here, but if you can just bring it back to here and focus on these things. Is that kind of what I'm hearing kind of got you through, instead of focusing on the long-term goal? Again, we've already discovered in the upfront, I'm an Alabama fan, right? But the Nick Saban, the process, right? His thing was, don't worry about the scoreboard. Just worry about the rep in front of you. Is that kind of the mentality that you had to take to kind of persevere through these things?
I think through the particularly challenging tasks, it was, you almost had to forget about the end game, because that could be overwhelmingly distant.
Right.
And that could be also, I mean, I'm looking at myself, I'm looking at this instructor, this guy that's standing in front of me with combat experience, and he's a no-kidding war hero. I'm trying to, equate myself to him. That's not going to compute very well, especially not in a stressful, challenging environment that I'm in. I'm mentally zapped at this, in this scenario. But in those moments, it's just a trust the decision, trust the process, drive through and grind it out in those moments.
Yeah. So the resilience, is that something that you can run out of, right? And what I mean by that, is there a point where you can only take so much and you just can't, like, you just can't overcome it? I mean, is can you reach a certain level like that, or is it
Yeah.
just like, hey, today if stuff just blows up in my face, man, it's just gonna have to just be dealt with at another time. Like, is
Yeah.
it
It's a great question, and by no means am I an expert on the topic, and I'm sure there are experts out there. But from my experience, one of the biggest things that I've noticed, and now I've transitioned away from the military training. I've transitioned away from the operational training, and even in my own daily life, as tasks come up, I know what I've got on my calendar, and sometimes, and we all experience this, right? I got an idea of what I'm gonna do. I wake up in the morning. I start my work day, and then things start coming in. Issues start arising that completely eclipse the plan I had for my day. Even if it was not a well drawn out plan, I had a picture of what I was going to accomplish today. And I get to the end of that day, and it did not go the way I wanted it to. And I've got to come back and I've got to try again tomorrow, right? And so I think what I've noticed in myself is that I can tell when, I guess if it was like a resilience meter, I'm getting a little tapped out. I did one more curveball and I could snap. I could, things are going to start shutting down for Joe, right? And so for me, it's been a matter of, okay, what are the tools I can use in those moments? And I think a lot of factors go into how much of that meter you've got to play with. How well rested are you? How well have you been taking care of yourself? Have you been for me, it's, have I been getting my activity level in? That's a huge indicator. If I skip workouts for a week, my resilience meter is smashed, right? So there's all these different factors that go into it. But then as I feel that stress and tension start to build, what do I do with it? And that's been a real learning process for me.
That's a really great point. And we talked about hustle culture in the last episode and kind of debunked all these things. And at their core, I think there's some good nuggets in there.
Absolutely.
And they're telling you, and then this is just all clicking to you live in the studio. It's all clicking in my little brain here. But they're telling you how to be mentally tough. So you're planning for these things, but they're not really telling you how to be resilient. But you mentioned something that makes a lot of sense. While it's hard to train for it, there are some controls in your resiliency lifespan, right? Like, are you getting enough sleep? Are you filling your body with a lot of, like, are you putting yourself in a good space so when your stress levels, right, hit the fan, like you're not already at max stress, like you've got some bandwidth to grow there.
Yeah, and because one, you're not going to do a very good job of whatever comes next if you're living in that high stress kind of mode. And two, I'm not happy there. I don't feel good there. I don't get done with a work day that tastes like that and feel good. So I don't want to hang out in that, and I want to figure out how to drop that stress level down, bring that meter down a little bit.
Do you feel like kind of going through this training and understanding that your awareness of these types of things, like you have a higher level of just recognizing today's not going to be the day, or today I could, throw at like throw whatever you want to at me today. I got this. Like,
I have grown, and not from day one in the Army. That level of awareness, and I'm still growing. I'm still learning about me, right? And that's something I feel like I'm continuing to be aware of, grow in my knowledge of, okay, what are the tools that I can do to kind of get myself back into a good space for taking on more tasks, and when is it I need to walk away and just kind of chill out for a minute. And I can't take another curveball right now. I got to go create some distance from me and my stressors to kind of recover that and come back fresh. But I think my military experience was hugely impactful in me being able to kind of grow those capabilities of managing that mental resilience. And then I became really more aware of that as I got older.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So we're going to wind down here just for a second, take a little break. And then when we come back, what I want to dig into is,
there you go.
What I want to dig into is, I want to talk about, some of the applications, right, and how we can apply this to our lives as husbands, as fathers,
Sure.
and things like that. And then as we wind it down, I do want to talk about like this mental toughness. Do we feel like as we get older, like, can we learn this? Is it too late in the game to learn this? So we're going to take a little break, and we will be right back. Well, welcome back, guys. Well, Joe, that was good stuff that we had in the upfront segment about this, but I want to talk a little bit about what I really admire about Special Forces Green Beret is this notion of being a quiet professional.
Right.
What does that actually mean?
To me, that expresses the lack of a need for recognition, a lack of a need for telling everybody about what we've accomplished or what we've done. And I think a lot of it, you hear a lot of talk about the why. Why are you doing something? And if the why is wrapped up in I need to earn the headgear, I need to earn the tab on my uniform, and I need that for my validation, then that's not really in line with the quiet professional. The why for us is much more about the guys and gals that we serve with downrange, or the people that we help in the countries that we travel to, and the partnerships and friendships that we forge there. Those are the why that really keep you going and drive the passion for the work and the desire to continue to improve. But the why is not the recognition or the accolades or anything along those lines. And that to me is what the quiet professional kind of expresses.
Did it take you a while to get there, or was that something that was inherently part of who you were prior to going this route?
I think I was a little inclined to be that way, on a personal level. But I think being around other guys that were of like mind, of that mentality of embracing that culture, that really allowed sort of a comfortableness in that we weren't chasing any sort of recognition or pat on the back. We were doing it for a lot of good reasons that had nothing to do with awards and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I feel like, one, I want to ask you this question. Do you think that is something that somebody that may inherently have these desires for self-fulfillment, betterment, and maybe it's not necessarily validation, but it may help them prove themselves, like, to themselves, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also makes you feel good because you may get some, like, hey, I noticed this on your arm, or hey, I noticed that you've got that medal, or it could be any number of things. Like, hey, I saw that you were first team All-American playing whatever sport that you wanted to play. Like, it sets you apart. It makes you feel good. But do you think, like, people can transition into, I almost like hear what you're saying is like a servant leadership type of, where you're thinking your main focus is somebody else other than yourself. Mm-hmm. So you're not worried about the self-fulfillment. Can that be a learned behavior, or do you feel like you just have to naturally have this, like, selfless?
I think there's a little bit of both there, but I think to the point of, can it be a learned behavior? I think it's something that as you embrace it and as you live it, you find your fulfillment in those. For me, downrange, a lot of it was relationships. I was so attached to and passionate about the work that we were doing downrange with our partners. In some cases, it was in war-torn areas, people really struggling through some, astronomically challenging circumstances, and that we were able to come and in any small way assist. That to me was incredibly fulfilling. And I think after living it and embracing it and realizing that's my reason for driving on. And don't get me wrong, some recognition feels good. some accomplishments, some things to put on the uniform or on the wall. It feels good, and there's no reason they shouldn't feel good. And not a criticism of that. But if those things are the why that keeps you going, it's not the best of fuel, I think, is what I've found. It's really keeping an eye on the things that are more fulfilling, that you get out of the work.
So we talk a lot about purpose on this show and trying to find purpose. And we talked about it actually in the last episode. And good buddy Jansen mentioned, like, people just, we have these God-gifted abilities that if people were to just pour into those natural things, they'd find more fulfillment. But we spend so much, and because culture pushes in this way, social media, to go chase this comparison culture, which is largely the carrot culture, right? Like, the look at me, I've got to validate myself, I've got to be this guy right here. But hearing and just having a feel for what you've been through and what you've accomplished and what you've seen, and just like the difference that you've made by serving this country, and the difference that you made to set the country up for betterment. I get this sense of fulfillment, of purpose, and that stems from thinking about your brother or thinking about somebody else or serving a need rather than your own. And what if you had to, like, put that in a classification, like, how much better is that than fulfilling your own self needs? Like,
man, that's a big question.
It was.
There's a lot to unpack there. A lot to think through there. No, I think a lot of it, and I'll kind of go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, a little bit of a tangent, if I can.
Rabbit holes.
I really came, and we were talking a little bit about this earlier. I came to really picture my life in sort of three categories. My efforts served three functions or three categories, and then they all needed my attention and my investment of time and effort. And those were my career, my work. The second was my family, and not in order of importance, of course, but career, work, and then my family, and then myself. And I when I look back over the last 20 years and I think about the fulfillment I received from any one of those three, the work was a huge part of it. The family was, the brunt of it. When I think about the fulfillment, and that ties into work, they're not distinct or completely exclusive of each other, but a huge component of the fulfillment that I felt was the pride that my entire family took in this adventure that we were on in this military service, because it wasn't just mine, right? The sacrifices that my wife made, that my kids made, monstrous sacrifices. So for me, there was some why wrapped in the family and the pride we took in that sacrifice. Again, it was a relatively quiet sacrifice. Not a lot of people saw it. My family received, little to no recognition for what they did for the country in that sense. But it was still incredibly powerful for motivating me and keeping me moving. I think the career aspect of it, the things I experienced with the work itself, the fulfilling part of that was really the relationships that were forged there, whether it was with teammates or whether it was with our partner forces and the guys that we worked with exclusively downrange. So I think I drew from both of those in an immense way.
Yeah. Because we've already done the pre-brief on this, to put it in the Army language, I know where you're going to go with this, because you won't give anybody else advice, but you'll give younger Joe advice.
Yes, sir.
So just knowing the pressure, right, that is on, because this show caters to men and dads, but let's put the pressure that are on men and dads to be this, I don't want to call it, but make-believe standards based on social media.
Sure.
Or whatever, and it's the art of self-promotion per se, and that's just the tendency of where culture is headed. What advice would you give those dads out there, those men out there that are just in this space of trying to figure it out. Maybe they have some imposter syndrome. They're
Sure.
not really being authentic to self. But kind of what we discussed today. What advice would you give a younger Joe that could then be an example to other people?
Oof. So I'll touch on imposter syndrome because I think I've experienced that. I can't even begin to describe how much the guys that I don't even know if I can use the phrase kept up with. I mean, just absolute monsters in every sense of the thing. Incredibly intelligent, incredibly physically gifted, and I felt like, man, one day they're gonna figure it out, right? One day I'm gonna get voted off this island, yeah. Right? But I did my best to keep up, right? And I think in today's, social media environment, it's so easy to compare to people who are living in a completely different existence, right? You can get online and compare yourself to just, a guy or gal that has all the time and resources in the world to just work on themselves. The career part, the family part, they can shelve that and you'll never see it. And they'll just be serving themselves. But you see the results and you think, well, I got to keep up with that. And it's not realistic. And it doesn't serve it doesn't serve me well to compare myself to somebody completely out of context. I have to return back to what's important to me and strike the balance in my own life of those three sort of areas of my life, of family, of self, and of work. So I think it's so challenging right now to really keep things in perspective, and the social media feed will just absolutely blow guys out of the water.
So this is the Fit Fat Dad podcast, and you're definitely a dad. How many children do you have?
Seven.
So,
Yes, sir.
Let's take note here. A lot of advice. We got to listen to this one. A lot of experiences.
Oh boy,
with this.
You flatter me.
But based on what we've kind of talked, do you have I love the quiet professional, because that concept to me is doing things out of humility, doing work that nobody's going to notice. And you know it's for the betterment of somebody, and you're not glorifying yourself. So as a dad, do you have in your mind kind of a scorecard of how you're evaluating yourself? Rather, am I doing good here? Do I need correction here? Like, what's kind of your measurement to know whether you need to pick it up or?
Wow.
Loaded question on the Dad podcast.
Right. So there's been a couple things that have stuck with me over the years. And one, I can't make this up. I was in a waiting room, some kind of medical waiting room. I was a dentist's office or something. But I read a magazine. And it was just whatever was sitting on the coffee table, and I'm flipping through this thing. And this article stuck with me to this day. And one of the things that this article was talking about was dads. And I took it as dads because I'm a dad, but it may have just been parents in general. We should strive for, and the article had what I think is an absurd number, 10 points of connection. Have you heard this?
No, but I just know there's always like 10 top.
Yeah. 10 points of connection that you should have with your kids. And I thought that was an interesting concept, and that if you should go through, kind of your relationship with your kids. What do we connect over? Maybe it's over football. Maybe it's over working out. Maybe it's over reading. We have similar interests in reading, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, what do I do with my kids? For my 4-year-old, how I connect with my 4-year-old, completely different than how I connect with my 14-year-old or my 21-year-old or my 20, And so when I've looked at my relationships with my kids, I think one of the things that I've found very helpful is, do I still have an active thing that we connect over, an interest, a thing that we talk about, a thing that we do together, whatever it might be. And it's different for each of my kids. Sometimes I have one thing that I'm really connected with my kid. And 6 months from now, with that, in that same relationship, it might be 3 or 4 things. And it ebbs and it flows. But if I find that I have 0, that's a huge red flag for me. And I don't know if 10 is a reasonable number. That's what the article said, and that read very nicely. But that's my metric of how many things are we connecting over that really bring us together and that we can share. So that's been one tool of how I sort of evaluate myself as a dad. Another thing, and this is another rabbit hole, so bear with me, but some years back, I went through a rather tedious process. I had this idea that I wanted to figure out how much my priorities lined up with how I was living my life on a day-to-day basis. And my thought was, am I dedicating time and energy into the things I say are important, or am I living one life but talking about something that's completely different? And what I did, and it was overly tedious and I couldn't maintain it, but I did it for a few weeks, was I really tracked like my by minute through my day. And like I said, not sustainable in any way, shape, or form, but it was very interesting what I found out. And what I found out was I was dedicating a lot of time to things that weren't very important to me, or I was wasting a lot of time that I could be using in a more productive manner. And one of the things that I found out about myself was I talked a lot of game about how important my family was to me. But on a regular Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, how much time was I actually pouring into those relationships? Because I woke up, I was out the door before anybody was awake. I had to go get this early morning workout, which was part of the routine of being on a team at the time. And I would get home just in time to, sit down to dinner and or, make it barely to the soccer game or the football game or what have you. But that's still not interacting with my kids, right? I'm watching, but there's no relationship building here. And then after that, we got, half an hour to an hour before they're off to bed. And was I really maximizing that time, or were we just sitting in front of the TV? Or was I just on my phone? Or was I just distracted with needing to clean up this, that, or the other, rather than spending that time playing with my kids or connecting with my kids? And I found I really started to identify, man, I gotta make a deliberate effort here to shift. And it's not a I fixed it and it's done thing. It's a, man, I kind of gotta constantly reevaluate. Monday through Sunday, how am I investing in the things that are really important to me, and namely my family?
I love that.
Ah.
That is good stuff.
Nice.
Because I can relate, and I would imagine most dads can relate to that. And I love how you position mental toughness and resilience, because it's all clicking here now. The mental toughness piece is there's this desire, at least for me, and to have in mind all these things that I want to accomplish personally, and then as a family, and talk about all these things I want to do with my kids and help them grow and help them learn. And then you get punched in the face by your day.
Right.
And people take your energy. And for me, by the time that, like, and I think with most people working like a 9 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever, your mental energy is drained. And then what you have that you had planned and their mental toughness to spend with your kids, you are now in this like resilience arena of, how am I going to overcome and give them the version that they need to have? Or are we just going to have a mental vacation day on a Monday, Tuesday,
Right.
that for me sometimes is rolling into the whole week, where it's just vegging out in front of the TV, and we're in the same room,
Yeah.
but we're not really relationship building or connecting. So I love that exercise that you said that you did and evaluated yourself. And I'm actually want to do that myself. And without even having done it, I know where I sit. You know what I
Right.
mean? But it's...
And I think it's almost like the counting calories thing.
Yeah.
Like, I've done that before, and I've found it very helpful, but it's not something that I could sustain very well and have it. But it gave me a snapshot and a picture, and it was like, okay, I do appreciate how much going down this rabbit hole of getting distracted by these tasks, how much time I'm pouring into that, and how I could otherwise, invest that time into things. And like I said, it's to go back to what you mentioned earlier. If I could give 25-year-old Joe some advice, it would be really take a deep, long look at how you're using your time and make sure that lines up with the values you say you have, that you really do value, but are you living that out? And then, man, I don't know if 25-year-old Joe would have listened. I was a little cockier back then, but I've learned over the years, and I continue. My wife is the best at, kind of bump steering me and saying, "Hey, look, you're coming home stressed out. You're switching off the office hat. You're taking that off and you're putting on the dad hat, but you're carrying a lot of that stress with you, and I've got to be able to, give those relationships the time and effort that they deserve." So
yeah, that's good. So we're going to take a little bit break here, and then we're going to come back and we're going to close, recap what we've talked about. But also another interesting thing is I want to talk a little bit about how, because you mentioned it about the resilience. How are you, because you mentioned some good things that you're doing now with your health and your sleep and things to set you up to be in a better position for this mental resilience. So when we come back, we will talk about that. All right, welcome back. We are in the fourth and final quarter of this episode. And Joe, we've covered a lot of ground today, and it's all been great. But a few things I want to touch here. So we'll recap, and I want to cover a few things. But let's first talk with a little bit about just having some conversations with you. You told me that you were eating a special diet, and then you were very cognizant of what you were taking in your body in terms of caffeine and limiting alcohol and just all these things. That was very inspiring to me. But now it all makes sense based on how you touched on the mental resilience. So can you talk to me, like, what are you doing now in this different stage of your career where it's you're no longer gearing up for a deployment or having to do all this stuff. So now you get a lot more like what normal people get to do, So how does that look like? And I'm still just very impressed that you have this mindset.
Well, one, I'm still figuring it out. I think I'm 6 months into this whole second phase of my career and second chapter of my life, as professionally speaking. So I'm still figuring out how that looks and makes sense for me, and how that looks and makes sense for my family and our goals. So by no means am I got it figured out yet, but I'm getting closer, I feel like. But yeah, the when it comes to the mental resilience, I've gotten better over the years, right? About being just a little self-aware of the wheels are starting to wobble. They might not be off yet, but I can feel that stress level kick up. There's a self-awareness that constantly growing. And I've gotten better about, okay, what kind of set the stage for that? How did I get here? And sometimes it's as simple as, and I really have been neglecting my workouts recently. There is a close connection for me, and I'm sure for many folks out there, there's a close connection for me between activity level and just general mental toughness, resilience, health, all of the above, just general well-being. And I take that for granted sometimes. I get distracted by my day and the things and the activities, and I can usually start to see that unfold in my daily mental resilience, if you will. But in those moments, I've tried to come up with, what tools can I leverage quickly to keep the wheels on? Because short term, I gotta get through this moment. And then how do I get back to a better place so that I can not keep running into the wobble anymore? So for me, being able to step back and, in our medical training, we would refer to it as triage the situation, prioritize tasks, as it were. In the medical field, which I'm no medic by any stretch, but I've got enough exposure to dabble, and it's triage patients, right? But for the office setting, for the daily life setting, it's triage tasks. What do I gotta focus on, and what can I really kind of shield out the rest and laser focus on one task? And that usually kind of brings down the stress level, but it starts with triaging what's the most important thing right now, and let's get on that task right away.
Yeah. And by no means do I mean to like insult other people's careers, but I do think there's a handful of careers, right? Whether it's, being a surgeon or in your case, what the things that you did, but like they have like the margin between like messing up and major disasters. Like there is a handful of careers that have that level of risk and association with that. And again, not to undermine other people's career, but now that you're getting into this professional world where the stakes, they're high, but they're not that level of high. Are you still having the same level of mindset that you've had in your previous career? Or is there a different outlook? Like I know when you were deploying and you were doing the things that you were doing, you didn't have as much family time. So do you now find yourself in this situation where you can kind of sit back and enjoy that a little bit more? And if your priorities, have they changed at all in terms of your professional career and how you view things?
Yeah, well, and I'll touch on something real quick. So sort of the idea of the different fields and careers and the stress and the gravity of certain tasks that are high stakes, right? And we have a benefit of when we know a task is high stakes, we can focus in on it, right? I can't think about anything else right now. I got to go out on mission and I got to go do the thing. So all of these other things kind of get blurry or out of our vision for the moment. And that's a way to manage all of that stress, right? Ignore all the rest, laser focus on the one thing. And that's a comfortable approach for me. What I've found is that it's a completely different type of stress where it's now I've got all of these different things coming at me, competing, and it's kind of it's a completely different environment that I've got to learn to manage these things. And family time, competes with work time, competes with workout time, and all of these things. And so how to strike that balance and not let the stressors build up of like how do I be in three places at once? That's a whole skill set of its own that by no means do I think is eclipsed or lower on the challenging level than the high stakes environment. We just learn to manage them both differently. But I am still very much growing in my balancing act and making sure that all those stressors, I'm managing those correctly.
Yeah. So a question that came this way, I asked to do our call-in segment again, and apparently people get scared to call in and have their voice on air. But the question that I got asked is it too late to learn mental toughness or mental resiliency? The way this person wrote in, it's like, hey, I'm a dad, over 30. I'm in this stage in my career where I'm now managing people. And he mentioned imposter syndrome. He's like, sometimes I don't feel like I'm leading appropriately. So I feel like I got to be tougher mentally and do all these different sorts of things. And then, as a father, I've got this that I'm trying to figure out. And as a husband, I've got these types of things. So can you relearn these things, or can you start from a different place and establish some of these foundations at a later age?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and the sword cuts both ways. I think you can absolutely grow in those. I sure hope you can grow because I intend to. I think you can grow in those ways. And I also think if you let off the gas, if you allow yourself to get complacent, you can absolutely backslide too. And I don't think it's you gain mental resiliency and then you just got it, or you gain mental toughness and then you just got it, and for the rest of your life you're a mentally tough guy, or you're a mentally resilient guy after that. I don't buy that. That's not been my experience. I know that if I'm setting the stage right, if I'm taking care of myself and I'm taking care of my family, and I'm really living those values that I say are important to me, and I'm following it up with how I spend my time, I'm in such a better place to take on whatever challenges come my way in the form of mental resilience. When I neglect those things, I backslide, and then I'm shaky going in, and I can't roll with the punches. I can't take the curveballs, and I get flustered and overwhelmed, and it all falls apart, right? So I think it's a constant ebb and flow, but I do think that learning it after 30, 100%. I mean, I strive for it on the regular, and I think if it can be unlearned, it can be learned, and back and forth we go.
So we mentioned a little bit about hustle culture,
Mm-hmm.
and you told me that you've taken little bitty nuggets of all these things, and the things that are good you use, and the things that are absolutely trash you throw them out there. Do you still find yourself now, with all the experience that you have, still like absorbing these things, or like, what's your opinion on the whole hustle culture and what's
Sure.
out there in the social media realm?
I absolutely drank that Kool-Aid. The Kool-Aid of, I'm going to be up till 11 o'clock, and then I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock, and I'm just going to get after it. And I got to have that little bit of crazy. Was kind of what I would tell myself. I got to be a little bit of crazy if I want the results that I want to get, right? And that kept me motivated, and I kept that kind of pace for really kind of a long time, a big stretch. When I look back at that stretch of my life, though, and I think about how I was taking care of those 3 areas of my life, man, I was burning myself out a lot. And others might be able to maintain it. But to me, that's akin to setting out on a marathon and sprinting up a hill. Like, if your goal is to sprint for a short duration and then get back to a sustainable pace, I can understand that. I can get down with that now, right? And maybe it's my career really needs a lot of attention from me right now. I really got to sprint in that lane of my life right now. And the family, I need their support, but they're going to get a little bit less of me. My personal goals and growth, it's going to get a little bit less of me. I really got to focus on my career, or it might be in a different lane. That's fine. It's a sprint. But when we get sucked into, when I got sucked into, that's how I should sustain my being, and that's how I should execute day in and day out for no end in sight. That's where I really think I hit burnout, and it's not the best years of my life in terms of what I gave to my family and what I gave to my teammates, and how I progressed or grew as an individual. It wasn't my best version.
Right.
So to me, when I really need to get a little bit of extra motivation, when I need to, I made this plan, right? I need the mental toughness to execute. It's 5 a.m. and I said I was going to run this morning, and I'm thinking about hitting that snooze button and all of that. I do kind of draw on some of that inspiration from the hustle culture, from I consume the speeches that are put to the music, and man, it really, it really going, right? Yeah. And then I think of Arnold and Sleep Faster, and I love that stuff, and I consume it. But for me, it has to have a place, and it's a sprint that I can't sustain for forever. So, but that's what the doctor orders at 5 or 6 in the morning, or even sometimes if it's a noon workout, I'm just not feeling it, and man. I need a hustle video right now to kind of just motivate me. Sure,
get you over the
yeah, but I have found tremendous value in getting my health taken care of, taking time for the things that keep me kind of centered and balanced, and sleep has been a part of that for me. That's been something that I neglected for a very long time, and then man, finally started sleeping regularly, and I was like, holy smokes, this is how I could feel. This is what it's like to have a solid night's sleep for more than once or twice a week. This is cool. So yeah, it's the hustle culture has its place for me.
Yeah. So I'm going to recap my note-taking skills just to see how well I listen. But for those that like to jump ahead to the fourth quarter and get their key takeaways, what I've learned today with talking to you is, one, there's a difference between mental toughness and mental resiliency. Mm-hmm. And my takeaways that I'm taking back is mental toughness. Those are the things that we plan for that can be uncomfortable, that can make us just be more disciplined in nature, and they're tough in nature, and we may not want to do them, and they're not comfortable, but we've got to we know what they are, even if it's tough to do, and we just overcome the negativity in our mind to do that. Mental resiliency is where stuff hits the fan or stuff takes you off your predetermined schedule. Mm-hmm. Now, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to adapt and overcome? And just really, you got to make choices now.
Yeah.
So things aren't as easy as you naturally thought they were going to be. And how do you manage yourself through that? But probably the biggest key takeaway I've learned is you can prepare yourself by taking care of your health, right? And mm-hmm. your mental state, whether it's managing your stress levels, sleep, exercise, spending quality family time, finding outlets to mentally decompress that set yourself up to be better prepared to respond in the face of adversity, which is the mental resilience piece. So those were my key takeaways. How'd I do on the note-taking?
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it, brother.
Well, there's just so much goodness that you unpacked today, and I really loved your story and your background, and I know there's so much more in there that you can't tell, right? But and maybe one day, probably never because of the confidential agreements of what you've done, right? But it's just so cool to be in the presence and hear these things and your perspective of knowing or not knowing, just having the feeling of what you've accomplished and been through in your life. To hear these nuggets, it's very valuable to me, and I know it's very helpful to our audience out there. So before we drop, is there anything else out there that you want to cover or mention, or
no
shout outs?
Man, I think the one thing I'd throw out there is I appreciate what you're doing on this podcast, because we are absolutely inundated with messages about all of these things that we should do to get ahead and grind on a daily basis. And there's not enough emphasis on really delivering for our families as dads, as professionals, and as individuals, how we all really need to strike that balance. And man, I wish I had something like this.
Well, now you do.
Some time ago. It would have helped 25-year-old Joe for sure.
Yeah.
But man, thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, no, hey, thank you for coming on. I heard it's kind of a piece of inspiration, and as you notice, we've got a little bit deeper in our conversations of how we do things, which is kind of always the vision for what we want to do. But I kind of personally went through this a little bit, but then when somebody structured it in this way, it's like how valuable a father is in the family, right? Mm-hmm. And leading their children and their spouses. And I know we all lead each other, but if you take the father out, right, then I'll just label it enemy, but it could be anything, right? Like stuff that's just not right, or somebody can go down a bad direction. Like if you take the father out, like statistically speaking, like you can get to the family easier and then absolutely ruin generations, right? And so that's just like, to me, how important it is as a father. And if we can showcase like these things that, hey, we're all in this fight together, and we all have some of the same similar things, and we all get to this point of like, nobody really gives you the blueprint for father. There's all these books, but you just the resiliency piece has to come through in that. And I think if we can just talk it out and share advice, like, we're going to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
somebody can take away something.
And I think dads messaging their pride in their roles and then their pride in their contributions to their family. And by no stretch, as a dad, I talk about my space, and that's what I can, convey an experience of. But then also, no smaller role to the mom or any of the family structures. But it's, I think as a dad consuming kind of that positive peer pressure of, it's good to embrace these things. It's good to embrace your role, and it's not just about getting ahead at work and making money and getting bigger and fancier and more things and all this stuff. And it's getting back to, at the end of the day, being a dad is awesome.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And so to be surrounded and build community and build positive peer pressure, I think is so valuable.
Yeah, dude. Well, thank you for your time today, and thank you guys for tuning in. And we'll be a wrap here. And just remember that when the father leads, the family wins. So we're out here. Peace.